Hello, and welcome to the Designing with Love podcast. I am your host, Jackie Pellegrin, where my goal is to bring you information, tips, and tricks as an instructional designer. Hello, instructional designers and educators. Welcome to episode 120 of the Designing with Love podcast. You're listening to part 3, the finale of my series with Hamza Sami, where we focus on assessment that shows real learning when AI is in the mix. Welcome back to the show, Hamza.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you for having me back.
Yes, I'm so glad to have you back. And at the time of this recording, we're in the middle of January, so it's really exciting. And you were on earlier, episode 100. Now this is episode 120, so it's amazing. I love it.
Yeah.
Great. So to anchor our thinking in first principles, what are some core purposes of assessment that must stay front and center when AI tools are available?
Okay, so when we go back to the first principles, the most important thing to remember is why do we assess? Assessment is a means, not an end. The end is learning, real understanding, comprehension, the ability to apply knowledge meaningfully. So even when AI tools are available, the core purpose of assessment must be the center and the focus. Assessment exists to support learning, not just to measure it. We have assessment for learning. What also we call it formative assessment, and we have assessment of learning, which is what we call summative assessment at the end of the course. So to focus on the formative assessment, it should help students see what they understand and where they are struggling, and what to do next. AI can assist here by offering feedback, for example, but the purpose remains helping learners build clarity and confidence, not just produce correct outputs. Now, assessment should make us see how students think, should make thinking visible. So we design assessments that reveal how learners reason, how they make decisions, how they connect ideas. Also here, AI can help to generate content, but it cannot replace the learner to explain why they made some choices in their submissions, for example. Assessment should guide instruction and feedback. It's not only for students, it's also for educators. It tells us as assessors or educators what is working, what needs to be revisiting, for example, where are the misconceptions relies, or where are the students are struggling. So it gives us a heads up before it's too late. Also, we can talk about how the assessment build the learner responsibility and self-evaluation. As we said, it's not only for the learners or for the instructors, but it can help to evaluate the students' personal comprehension and understanding of the material. If it designed well, the assessment can help students to become better judges of their work, so they can self-reflect. This can be done by self-assessment or peer feedback or reflection, which, for example, in AI-rich environment, this becomes more important because students need to evaluate not just their work, but also the outputs of the AI content.
Right.
So the key point here is the purpose of assessment doesn't change eventually, but the understanding, the growth, the meaningful learning stay the goal. What changes are the tools we use to get there. So instead of asking how do we stop students from using AI, because we cannot stop them from using AI, it's there, and it's a valuable tool if we think about it also. But we should ask, how do we design assessment that help them to understand and explain and apply what they are learning with or without AI.
Right. Wow. That's amazing, Hamza. I love that. You talked a little bit about the formative, right, and the summative. So, because we want those formative or learning and progress checks to build trust, what do you think are some low stakes checkpoints that can help students practice with AI openly and surface some of those misconceptions that may surface a little bit earlier in the process instead of later on?
Okay, so first we need to guide the students on how to use AI in their study. We cannot just assess them without giving them instructions and guidance on how of the responsible use of AI. In my master dissertation, actually, I was as I told you, I was researching the use of ChatGPT in higher education. So after I finished, it helped me to build a student guide to responsible use of AI. So we built this guide and we shared it with our students, where we explained the purpose of the guide, of course, and how to use AI in their studies. We gave them examples, the responsibilities, the limitations, and the risks of using AI. How can they misuse AI and it negatively affect them? And we gave them examples of the misuse so they can avoid it. We also gave them how to cite or acknowledge their use. It's very important so they can openly share with us that they are using AI. It's not something to hide.
Right.
Also, we recommended in the guide, we recommended some AI tools for different purposes. So trust is everything. If learners feel they have to hide their use of AI, we will lose the visibility into their own thinking.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so the most effective low stakes, to answer your questions, are the ones that invite students to use AI openly, intentionally, and critically. One simple and powerful approach we can talk about, and actually we do in our center, it's in the scheme of work for the teachers. We advise them to use it in every session. It's in class AI supported exercise or discussion. So, for example, the teacher would ask the students to use AI tool to generate an initial response to a prompt, for example, about a topic in that subject. Then they draft a paragraph or explanation. Then they compare and with another source like a book or an article or um, any reliable resource. So the key is that AI output is not the final product, but it's a starting point for the learning. So once the AI response is generated, here we began the assessment, the formative assessment by guided discussions. So we ask students, what did the AI do well here? What are for example, is the content accurate in terms of the information? Did they double check the content, the accuracy? It is reliable. It is generalized, not specific to their prompt. So these steps help students to see that like the how AI can sound confident while still being wrong or incomplete or biased sometimes.
Right.
Yeah, so you can also build trust through reflection-based checkpoints after using AI. Students can write their own reflection, like how did AI help them? For example, where did it fall short? What did they have to correct or rethink themselves? You know. So
Right.
these are some of the checks or low stakes checkpoints. Yeah.
I like that. That's great. And do you usually, in the guide, do you ask students, or do the faculty ask students to provide screenshots of the conversations that they're having with AI, so the faculty can kind of see what the process looks like, and then they can kind of look at the reflection and see, oh, I see, where their thought process went, and because for the assignments that I grade that have students use AI explicitly, we ask for screenshots. So I'm not sure. Did they do that as well at the center?
Of course, this is actually in the policy of the citing and the citing policy, how to cite references. We added this in details on how to acknowledge the use of AI in their assignments. So as you said, yeah, one of the ways is to take screenshots and to write how they used AI. We also guided them to share the link of the conversation, so the assessor can see all the questions and the answers, and how did they amend that answer, or what's their contribution to that response of the AI generated content.
Right.
So of course, yeah, using a screenshot, or they can add it in the appendix of the submission if it's a report, or even if it's a presentation, they can add in the reference list. They can add the link to the and cite ChatGPT. So we have an overview of how the student used AI in their submission.
Wow, that's great. I love that. So you talked a little bit about reflection, and that's one of my favorite ways to have students kind of think about, like you said, what AI did well at, where it fell short, and maybe what they do differently next time. I've had students do that too, like what they would do differently. I like that, because then they're always thinking critically, right, about the use of AI and how it's being used in their work, not just academically, but then they tend to think about the future of work and how AI is going to be their partner along the way, right? Their creative partner.
Yeah.
So we know evidence should reflect the learner's capability. And this is something you and I have talked about before, but I think it's becoming more and more, what am I trying to say? It's becoming at the forefront, I think, especially in higher education and workplace training, as authentic artifacts and authentic assessment. So when we look at things such as drafts, process notes, and maybe even oral defenses, right, a presentation or live demos, what are some things, like those? Do you think there's some that work best in that environment, especially with AI, or are there some that are just kind of low-hanging fruit that you think we can really focus on? What are your thoughts on that?
I agree with you. Drafts and processes and process notes work well because they make thinking visible. So when students submit early versions of their work and explain how they got there, we can quickly spot misunderstandings or gaps in their reasoning, or over reliance on tools like AI. More importantly, we can address these issues before it's too late, before they come embedded in the final submission. That's why when we say evidence should reflect the learner's capability, the key idea here is we need to see learning while it's happening, not just as a final product, what we call assessment as learning.
Right.
So we assess the learners as they are learning. It's similar to the formative or the assessment of learning, or for learning, sorry. So this can also happen in the class discussion, which is one of the most effective authentic artifacts we have in our center. As I told you, like in the AI based exercise, also when students talk through their ideas, why they chose this certain approach, for example, or how they interpreted a concept, we get a direct evidence of their understanding, how they are thinking. So these conversations act a real-time informative assessment and build a shared understanding of of quality and expectations from their teachers also. Also, you mentioned oral defenses and live demos, which are especially valuable because they require learners to connect knowledge to action.
Right.
For example, even a short explanation like walk me through your thinking. How did you reach to this point? It can reveal far more than a polished writing from on a report or an essay. You know. So if the student truly understand the content, they can explain it. They can respond to the question. But if they don't, it's not their work. You will know it's not their work. It's just a copy paste from an AI response. So the best authentic evidence is not about catching mistakes. We're not looking for mistakes. It's a creating visible moments of understanding through discussion, reflection, guided practices. Yeah.
Right. I love that. In the instructional design program where I teach at Grand Canyon University here in Arizona, they built the program in such a way that it's project based. And so, for example, I've got a class of 25 students, Hamza, that I'm teaching right now. So it's a big class, and it's the introduction course to instructional design. So it's their very first ID course that they take in the program. And so I have students that most of them are K through 12 educators, and I have some that work in the military, and one that he's worked with the U.S. Navy. And so he's got some of that experience, but majority of them are K through 12 educators. So they're having that imposter syndrome right now. And they're like, this is a lot, it's a lot to learn. And I agree. But what they have to do through this whole entire course is they have a glossary of instructional design terms. So they're learning about that, but each week they're working on some and they're adding to that document. But then throughout that, they're also working on a project, an instructional solution. So they have to look, where's there a gap, whether it's in my workplace or it's in the community. Maybe it could be at their church or at a community center or something like wherever it is, there's a gap somewhere. And so they have to do a needs assessment, and then they have to do a high level design document. And their assignment that was due last week was actually where they had to create their instructional materials. And then they had to do a reflection on that and talk about why they chose the specific delivery method. Were there any changes that they made to their materials from the high level design document? And some of my students actually talked about that. And they talked about how they realized as they were building their materials that they needed to make some changes based on what they discovered and working with the learners. So it was really exciting to see that and see them work through that. So I love those types of authentic project-based assessments where they get to work through that. And then this week they have to actually deliver to their target audience, whether it's one person or it's several people, and then they write about that. So it's really neat that they are actually going through the ADDIE model, right? And I get to see them work through it. And yeah, you're right. It doesn't have to look polished right away. What matters most is that they're working through that and they're seeing, okay, this is my first instance of doing this, but I'm able to learn as I do it, as I go through it. And I had one student in particular that kept working through her project at the beginning, and she's like, I keep wanting to work on it. And I'm like, you're not going to get it perfect. It's not going to be that way. And that's not how it is in the real world either, because an employer is not going to say, have 16 weeks to work on this. You may not get that. They may want it in 2 weeks. So I keep having a reminder. I'm like, you're not going to get things perfect. You just have to get it to the point where you feel like it's going to benefit the learners the most. And then you have to release it, because you're going to be working on multiple projects at a time, not just one. They're going to expect you to balance multiple projects. So you can't put all your effort in one project, because everything else is going to fall by the wayside. So she's learning that really early. And so it's a good learning experience for them. So I'm glad you brought that up with, those opportunities where it's not always the finished product that we're looking to grade. We want to see their progress along the way. I think that's just as important.
I agree, especially in their case as students, they are learning. So we don't expect from them a final result that just like when they work for a company, they want it's different case, So
Right.
they are learning, so they can make errors. They can change their way of thinking or their approach in the next project. But if they don't have a project, they just learn the theory, or they if they don't apply it, if they don't get their hands dirty, they will not learn from their own mistakes, from their own like from the feedback. They will not get feedback, of course.
Right, exactly. I like that you mentioned that the dirtiness of it. Yeah, it's okay to have things that aren't polished and perfect. So during prototyping, I call it dirty design, and I heard that somewhere, and I like that. I like the dirty design where it's not refined, it's not perfect, and that's what models like SAM and rapid development are all about. It's all about giving your stakeholders, giving your subject matter experts something that is not refined and is not perfect, because you don't want to spend too much time making something that's perfect for them. And then you have to go back and make a bunch of changes. I learned that the hard way in my first project as an ID, where I gave them feedback. I asked them, please look at this. Please look at the storyboard, right? Before I go and build it in Captivate. And she did. She looked at all the feedback, and it was wonderful. And I'm like, okay, now I know what to do, because this included it included a demo. So as you probably, if you've used Captivate before, and anybody that's listening has used Captivate before, when you go to do a demo in Captivate, each click, each drop down, anything that you do is it's like a slide in Captivate. So if you go, it's not like PowerPoint where you can just take out something and then it's okay. You have to go and re-record that whole simulation again from scratch. And
waste
so
of time.
and so I learned the hard way. I went to go and then I created that in Captivate and sent it to her before I had it tested with a few learners, because I had selected a few learners that could test it out for me before I implemented it and rolled it out to the whole entire department in enrollment. And so I had her test it out again, and she's like, wait, no, that's not right there, and that's not correct there. Can you just take that out? And I'm like, no, I have to redo the whole simulation again. And she's like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know that. But what I should have done as instructional designers, I should have been more explicit about what I was looking for and what I needed in my first initial feedback. So I learned about that. I was like, oh, that was a hard lesson. And I'm like, okay, now I know in the future to be more explicit about what kind of feedback I need, and that I really need her to look at certain things and not just keep it surface level, because she didn't realize that. She didn't know, and she felt bad. And I was like, it's okay. It's not your fault. It's, it was just miscommunication between us, and I just wasn't clear enough. So I learned early on with that. So yeah, that's so true. Yeah. So let's transition into rubrics, Hamza, because I think sometimes they, at least in higher ed, they kind of get a bad rap sometimes. And I think, but rubrics are such a good way to see where students are at and where they need to improve, right? Because that's what and accreditation, higher education is all about accreditation. We utilize that. Your rubrics are utilized as that type of quantitative, right? Assessment that we can utilize to show accrediting bodies that, hey, students are either they're learning it or they're not when it comes to competencies and things like that. So we want rubrics to, we want those to separate the polish from the understanding. So what's some criteria that you think can help distinguish that AI assisted refinement from genuine knowledge and skill? Where do you think that can be kind of separated a little bit, or, especially with educators, right?
Yeah, I think the key shift here is they should prioritize the evidence of thinking over surface quality. And to distinguish the AI-assisted refinement from genuine knowledge and skills, criteria needs to focus on the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. I know you, Jackie, you're a fan of Bloom's taxonomy.
Yes.
So these higher levels, for example, the critical thinking, the analysis, the evaluation, we can focus more on these, the justification, the demonstration, so they can apply it, not just like know or explain. Because these can be done like the first levels, they can be done easily in AI, and we wouldn't know who did what, unless
Right.
the student acknowledge it. So first, the strong rubrics should assess reasoning and decision making. So instead of asking what the answer is, we can ask the learner to explain why they chose this particular approach, for example. Criteria might include the quality of the justification, or the logic behind the conclusion, or how well students connect evidence to their claims. AI can help refine the language, of course, but it cannot replace the learner's reasoning processes.
Right. I love that.
Also, rubrics should also value the application in context. The context is very important, especially if the assignment provide the context. So when students apply the concept to a new or realistic or, for example, scenario, it becomes much more harder to rely solely on AI. So we need to see the students' input in that sense. Criteria here can focus on how well learners adapt knowledge or solve problems that don't have a single answer to them. All the higher order skills. Another powerful criterion is the process transparency. We mentioned how they openly discuss the use of AI. Rubrics can reward students for documenting how they arrive to the final like, for example, drafts. You mentioned screenshots of the use of the AI, decision logs, reflective notes, or even short oral explanations. So this will separate the genuine learning from the surface level polish one we talked about by making thinking visible.
I love that. Yeah, that's great. So we need to take our rubrics and bring them to the next level, and not just look at the lower level thinking skills, but the higher level thinking skills. Yeah, I love that. That's great. And instead of, like you said, describe or explain, take it to that higher level where they have to we're actually grading them on their demonstration and creation, things like that. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's great. Wonderful.
Yeah, because the when you evaluate something, you need to define it first. You need to explain it first, then evaluate. So it's already there,
Right.
It's already in the answer of the student's work, or if they explain something, they will, like, you will understand if you evaluate something, you already know what it is. So the first levels are already covered by just
Right.
going to the higher levels. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. I love that. So given the need for the summative or end of module checks that we like to have as well, which are just as valuable, which formats do you think are most valuable in this, such as performance tasks, capstones, or maybe scenario-based exams? Which ones do you think hold up best with AI in play? Hello, I have some exciting news to share with all of my listeners. There is a feature called fan mail. What this allows you to do is send me a text message anytime during the episode. There's a link located at the top of the description in each episode, and it says send Jackie a text message. So when you click on that link, you'll be able to send me a message letting me know what you thought about the episode and if you have any ideas for future episode content as well. I look forward to seeing your text messages. Thank you.
Okay, so when AI is in play, summative assessment still matters, but we count as evidence needs to evolve. What we count is the evidence. We want the evidence to evolve, So the format assess not just a final product, but the process and the judgment and the reasoning behind it. That's why you mentioned performance-based formats tend to be the most resilient in that case. For example, presentations combined with discussion, Q&A afterwards, are very powerful and effective in this case. When learners present their work and they engage in questioning, they have to explain their decision. They respond to challenges. They don't expect, for example, sometimes the questions from their assessors. They need to explain their own thinking in real time. So here we will understand if the students, like even if AI supported parts of the preparation discussion, reveal the depth of their understanding, the critical thinking, the ownership of their work. Also, reflective logs, it's very important. It grounds the experience are another strong, like summative component, you know. When learners connect theory to their own context, whether academic or workplace based, they demonstrate understanding that cannot be easily understood. Reflections on, for example, what worked, what didn't work, and why. This show the evaluation and learning transfer, not just to connect reproduction, you know. Another thing we use in our evidence is portfolio of evidence in the assignment. We also add that to some parts of the assignment, so depends on the subject, of course. It hold up well in AI environment. A good portfolio can include multiple artifacts like draft, revisions, feedback responses, and final output, which allow the assessors to see the growth over time and distinguish refinement from real learning. Capstones projects require learners to solve authentic and contextual problems. It's very effective with the process demonstration also, or the documentation. Yeah.
Right.
So another one you mentioned, which is very also I like this one because it you mentioned about like with your students you ask them to do a project with a real client. So the scenario based exams can play a huge role in that. But they work best when they are open-ended and applied, asking learners to justify their decision rather than recall information. So the format that hold up best, in my opinion, with AI, are those that require explanation and justification or emphasize process over polish, and involve interaction and reflection and real-world application. So basically, when summative assessment asks learners to show how they think, not just what they submit, AI becomes a support tool, not a shortcut.
Right. I love that. That's great. I like those types of projects too. Those are great. And one thing that's that they revised the instructional design program at the college recently, and what they did was they incorporated more group work into that, so that way they get the opportunity to collaborate together and work on, say, for example, there's one group project that my students have to work on in a class that I taught recently, a couple months ago, and they had to do a group project where they had to work on this job aid together for a company. And the scenario was basically they had to work on a customer service job aid for a company and talk about just different aspects of that. So they each had to work on that, and then they had to do a presentation about the job aid itself and why they made the decisions they did, right, as a team. So it was great because not only did it allow them to be able to work on this project together, but it also helped them to learn about communication, collaboration, all those things that we do as instructional designers. We never work alone in a project. We always work with a team. So it was great. I love that part. And it's authentic, right? Because it's real world application, like you said earlier. And so I think the more that we can make those types of things more authentic, I think and again, like we said earlier, that we're not expecting them to not use AI. We actually want them to use it, but we want them to, not replace the work they do, but have it come alongside them. So those types of projects are great too. Yeah, I really like those. Yeah. Wonderful. So for our bonus question, Hamza, to offer some quick wins, what are 3 assessment moves that any instructor could implement during the next semester or term that you'd like to offer?
Okay, first we can talk about adding a short explain your thinking checkpoint. This can be as simple as asking the student to include a brief paragraph, for example, or audio note, or any class explanation answering questions like why did you choose this approach? What was the most challenging part? What would you do differently next time? This small move shifts assessment from evaluating polish to evaluating understanding, and it works whether students use AI or not. Another way also, build in a short discussion or peer feedback moment. This could be a 5-minute in the class discussion, think, pair, share, or a brief peer review using guided prompts. When students explain the ideas to others or respond to questions, they clarify their own understanding and develop evaluative judgment. It's also one of the easiest way to assess learning authentically without adding, the grading load on the assessor. This is, we use that a lot in our center with our students, and it helped us a lot actually with some students who would miss some criteria in their assignment, especially the passing criteria. So we know they understand that concept. For example, we know they covered it in class discussion, so we would just refer to that in class discussion, and they would cover the criteria. So I think that's also effective. And a third one, we can ask the students to explain how they used AI with citing the process. We talked about how to cite it, the screenshots or a link to the ChatGPT conversation and the prompt, and explain how they reached to that output, or how their output was modified, to reflect their own contributions. So so this is the output from ChatGPT, but as a student, how did I change it to match the context I'm looking for,
right,
and to reflect on it also. Yeah, I think these 3 that are effective. I advise the instructors to use in their term or next semester. Yeah.
I love it. Great. Wonderful. So as we wrap up this episode, Hamza, here's the final question I want to put out there, because we've been talking a lot about assessment and education, but also in the workplace as well. So if you could change one assessment habit across a department, maybe if we're thinking about corporate, right, what would it be and why?
I think I would change the practice of collecting final reports or essays without ever discussing them with the learner. Before AI, we could use that, like just at the end of the assignment, submit a report or an analysis report, or But now it's not effective at all. It's not that it's not important. Of course, it's important. But right now, in many courses, students submit a polished product and receive a grade and move on, with little or no opportunity to explain their thinking, or ask questions, or reflect on the feedback. So when that happens, the assessment becomes a one-way transaction, instead of a learning experience. The purpose is, remember, we talked in the beginning of the episode about The purpose of assessment is learning and understanding. And it's difficult for the assessor to judge also. I remember a lot of time I was put in a very tricky spot where I question, is this I know the learner is hardworking, for example, or even if they were not, it's the same because I can see the language of the AI in their submission. And if in their report, especially in the written format submission, especially if I don't see their progress during the semester. So I will directly go to questioning or suspecting that they used AI. So, and sometimes it happened that we have to do an extra assessment format, for example, like a discussion or presentation. We ask them to present or discuss their understanding. So the issue is not with the essay or report itself. These are very valuable formats, of course, and they will need them in their work in general. But it's without dialogue, we are only assessing the output, not the student, not the understanding behind it. And in an AI-enabled world, the gap becomes even wider. So a simple change would be to pair written submission with a brief discussion touched on. This is what we do in our center. Like, for example, we are an assignment-based. We use assignment-based assessment. So in every assignment, there's a presentation. There must be a presentation as a part. And another part, for example, a written format. For the written formats, like reports, essays, even reflective journals, and so on, we ask the students to give a 5-minute any class discussion in front of the assessor and another reviewer, for example. And we ask them some questions to make sure, like we asked them first to walk us through the report, what they did as a content and how they reached to their conclusion. Then we ask them questions about the report, like in their submission, to make sure they understand what they wrote. So once that is done, we know that the students understand. That's the purpose of it. Remember, it's not that even if they relied overly on AI, they can explain what they wrote. So from the learner's perspective, this idea will reinforce the goal is understanding, not just completion. Builds metacognition and self-assessment skills for the learners, and makes feedback feel meaningful rather than final. So, and from the assessor's perspective, it improves the assessment validity without adding excessive grading load. We talked about that also.
Right.
So
right.
you're not changing. Yeah.
I like that. Yeah, that's great.
So you're not changing the assignment. You are changing how learning is evident. Is how the evidence is or the evidence is evaluated. So stop letting assessment end at submission, but start letting it continues through conversation, through dialogue.
Right. I like that. And then the students don't feel like they're doing busy work, right? They feel like what they're doing is meaningful, and the instructors will also feel like I'm not just grading a bunch of assignments and doing that, but they feel like they're actually grading the students' progress in each of the assessments. And it's more of a journey, not just, okay, this is the destination, then we're going to go on to the next, right? It's a whole journey for them that we're actually seeing along the way as they do that. I like that.
Yeah, I agree. It's also rewarding when you see the students' input at the end of the semester and their final submission. You feel the value of the learning experience throughout the semester, and they actually understood what the subject is.
Right, exactly. They walk away, and then when they go to their next course, they take some of what they learned and they apply it to the next course. And then you just, and there's instances where I've had students multiple times in courses where it's like, oh, I have this student again. And that I actually like that, because then I get to see their progress through the program. And I'm not just in one part of their learning experience, but I'm able to actually give them feedback along the way. And so I like when I'm able to have students multiple times throughout different courses in the program. So it's exciting. Yeah. And I'm sure and then the students enjoy that as well, because if they know my grading style and they know how I give feedback and it helps them along the way, then they're like, oh, I get Professor Pellegrin again. And so, so they like that, because they know how I go about assessing and grading their work. So, because if an instructor is passive in what they're doing and they're just saying, great job, and that's it, and they're not giving them that good, type of feedback, then all it is like you said, it's just a grade, right? It's just like, here you go, here's your grade. And then there's no meaning behind it. So, so I think one thing that instructors need to do too is really give solid feedback and make it meaningful, and don't just say good job and that's it. It's like, they need a little bit more than that. And look for those opportunities that they can improve, because there's always room for improvement. You and I have been in this field for a long time, and we still learn how to improve our work. So, if we're doing, I've been in higher ed almost 20 years, and I'm still finding ways to make improvements, because now AI is around. So it's like, oh, okay, how can I learn to work with it and improve the work that I do, without losing the human touch to it. So so it's just, it's so important. Absolutely. I love it. This was a great conversation, Hamza. Thank you so much for closing out this series with a clear assessment toolkit that helps us to prioritize evidence of learning over AI fluency alone. I think that's so important. So if anyone missed earlier parts, catch part 1 on AI norms and misuse, and part 2 on autonomy with SDL and ZPD. And then make sure to share this series with a colleague who is redesigning a course. So thanks again, Hamza. I look forward to maybe doing another series with you. So feel free to hop back on, and the door is always open for you.
Thank you, Jackie, for having me, and I look forward to it. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you for taking some time to listen to this podcast episode today. Your support means the world to me. If you'd like to help keep the podcast going, you can share it with a friend or colleague, leave a heartfelt review, or offer a monetary contribution. Every act of support, big or small, makes a difference, and I'm truly thankful for you.